Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on this cold night, and those on Zoom, welcome tonight. We're really happy that we have a nice turnout again. Who brought snacks today? Let's recognize. Okay, what do we have for snacks?
We have coconut macaroons and we have brownies.
All right. So, thank you so much for bringing us snacks. Appreciate it. I love the eggs box. Is that supposed to be a sign for something? Just kidding, just kidding. Just getting our hopes up, right? Okay, we have a great speaker tonight. We're gonna have Brad come up and do the introductions, and I'll turn it right over to you. We'll do announcements at the end before we head out. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. All right, so tonight we have Sean Rossler here speaking with us. Sean is currently the Wisconsin DNR's fur bear specialist. He's been in that position since 2016. Prior to that, he has worked for several agencies across a few different states, including Indiana, Wisconsin, and California. And he was working on other fur bear related topics in those positions. Sean earned his bachelor's and master's degree from Central Michigan University. And I think with all of that experience, I'm guessing he's going to know a little bit about our topic tonight on the river otters. So without further ado, help me welcome Sean.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you everyone for having me tonight. I want to especially thank Bob, who I was communicating with to line this up. It's nice to get out and travel about and be able to spend time talking with people about topics that I like. And tonight's one of those nights where I get to talk about fur bears, specifically river otter. But then also the fact that there's treats here too. Drive up from Madison tonight, well worth it, and try to give me a little energy, stay warm on the way back home. But just really appreciate again the invite to be here with you tonight. And so to kick things off, I just wanted to start off with what is a river otter. I'm sure a lot of people in the room probably already know, but as a fur bear biologist, I like to talk about this topic. And so a river otter falls into a group called mustelids. So how many people are familiar with the group mustelids, right? It looks like maybe a third of you. So the group of mustelids, I have a couple different examples. Here we have river otter, right? Wisconsin, we also have fisher. We have mink. Little orange throat patch, American martin, right? And then we also have this one, right? Yeah, I don't know if I'm allowed to show this one. That's Steven's pointer. And then I'll talk a little bit more about some of the characteristics of the coats. But the other thing with mustelids is that they have glands, towards the anus. And if you're familiar with mink or otter or anything like that, they come by their name because of those glands and the smell that comes along with those. So I'm going to show you some pictures later on. You're like, oh man, why is he going to show me all these pictures? But they're really good at scent marking. And so that whole group has a set of glands as well. So getting specifically into river otter, they're highly adapted to aquatic life. So we refer to them as semi-aquatic species, where they're spending most of their time in and around water, but they do cover or go over dry land. So if you just look at the coat of a river otter, a lot of fur bears have this as well, but you'll have a thinner outer layer with longer hairs. It's really hard to tell with river otter, but with some of the other species you can see it better, but that's the longer guard hairs, right? So those guard hairs help protect the under fur, and between those longer guard hairs and the under fur, it helps river otter be able to stay warm, on a night like tonight or swimming through the river or whatever. It's a very insulative purpose of that fur. Another thing that you look at when you look at a river otter pelt is the head, right? So a smaller head, but then smaller ears. Imagine having large ears trying to swim through the water, you know, that's not gonna work real well. They also have a flap in the back of the throat that they can close similar to beaver, so they can chew and consume and grab things under the water as well. Their body is tubular, made out of muscle. So if you were to look at a river otter and the muscle, there's a lot of muscle in the tail, a lot of muscle in the core, and not a lot of fat, right? So they constantly have to be moving, looking for food, fairly high metabolism, and they're active throughout the year, right? So they're not an animal that's gonna hibernate or den up or anything like that. The overall size, you look at the size anywhere from 3 to 4 feet. Tail's probably 20 inches and the body is, 30 inches or so. Weight anywhere from 1133 pounds. And the other thing that I want to mention about river otter real quick is that they have what's known as sexual dimorphism. A lot of the mustelids have it, which just means that the males are about 20% larger than the females. So if everyone's good with it, I'm just gonna pass this around. If you've seen a river otter pelt, you can just pass it quickly. And if you don't want to hold it, you don't have to. You can just pass it to your neighbor. We also the skull. So if you want to look at the skull of a river otter, you can take a look at that too, as far as the muscle attachment and the teeth and everything as well. And if you want me to pass around the other ones for comparison, I could do that. The other thing that I want to mention before we get any further, I like to be interrupted. So if there's like something that I'm trying to explain that's not making sense, or if you have questions in the moment, feel free to ask me those and we can address those in real time. But if not, I can cover them at the end as well. Getting into the distribution of river otter across the country. This is a map from 2016. It was pulled together by Dr. Nathan Roberts. So if you are familiar with Wisconsin, Dr. Roberts was our research scientist for a number of years. He since left and went to the College of the Ozarks, but he's still really interested in fur bearer management, fur bearer research. And so he's polled all the fur bearer biologists or researchers across the country and developed this map of river otter distribution. So you can see east of the Mississippi, just about every county has a presence of river otter. There's a couple in Ohio and Indiana that are white and brown, which means that they're absent or unknown. But again, this map was older. So I worked in Indiana for a number of years, and those white cells, those white counties there have since filled in. So if you look at the eastern US, it's pretty much like fully occupied. And then if you look west of the Mississippi, the desert Southwest, Colorado River, parts of Kansas, Texas, interspersed throughout, river otter really haven't filled in there. And that may make sense because there's not as much water or not as many reliable water sources and things like that for them, because that's a primary part of their habitat needs. So jumping into those habits or habitat, how many people here have seen river otter in the wild? So how many of you paddle, live on a lake, or spend time around water? Right? So if you're not doing any of those things and you're not around water, you're not going to see river otter because that's where they like to be. But all of you, that's something that you love and you've had that, great fortune to see river otter. Not everyone has, but I still describe their behavior at times as secretive. They can be active during the day or the evening, but generally the fur bearers are more secretive, so they're not like out and about, constantly throughout the day. But you will see them moving in and around different places. So lakes, streams, wetlands. And I also like to refer to them as graceful swimmers, not really like synchronized swimming, but if you've seen a larger group of otter, right, they're moving around, they're popping up, and there's just something graceful about that as far as the way that I would describe it. I don't know if someone else has a better word, but it's just really something that's special to see that. And then as far as dens, I'll show a couple pictures of dens that, as examples. But one question that I get a lot is, do river otter, create their own dens? And so generally speaking, river otter are gonna use the abandoned dens of other critters, like whether it's a muskrat burrow, they may dig that out. They may also use abandoned beaver bank den or lodge or something like that. They're generally not making their own, they're just making it better for them. What do river otter eat? Right, spend a lot of time around water. And so I think this slide's probably gonna make a lot of sense to the folks in the room here. But winter diet study that was done in Missouri, summer diet study that was done in Illinois. If you look at what was found in the scat, it's the same percentage almost essentially in the winter and the summer, with a large proportion being fish. And then the second largest proportion being crayfish, right? And so why do we see maybe a lower percentage of crayfish in the summer? The one thing that I can just think of is that crayfish are active in the winter. If you have more ice or more areas where their access is restricted, it may concentrate them and they may be more readily available for river otter to eat. And so those are the two main prey species that river otter will consume, but they'll also eat other things, right? So during they're opportunistic, they'll eat turtles, amphibians, anything like that. One thing that was a concern in Indiana while I was there was the hellbender. So hellbenders are, a species of concern throughout a portion of the country. And so with river otter being reintroduced, they were eating some of those hellbenders. And so there was some concerns there with higher concentration or higher densities of river otter could negatively impact hellbenders in certain parts of their.
What's a hellbender?
Hellbenders range. And so a hellbender is like a large amphibian, kind of looks like a mud puppy or salamander, large salamander, if you're not familiar. Other thing I want to talk about describing river otter is the reproductive cycle. So they have something that's called delayed implantation. Is anyone familiar with delayed implantation, how that works? Right, so it's just a reproductive strategy that a lot of the mustelids have, where mating occurs generally March or April. And then there's some cell division. And then basically there's like this blastocyst that floats around for a period of time. And it doesn't implant into the uterus or anything. It's just kind of they're in limbo, I guess would be a way to describe it. And so that occurs throughout the summer into the fall. And then in December and January, those cells will then implant into the uterus. And then you have the active pregnancy, which is generally December through March. And then you give birth in, somewhere between March and April, depending where you're at as far as latitude. And so that is a strategy to where the where the young are born when there's the most resources available, which is a great strategy. But the interesting about that is then the mating occurs right after the young are born, right? And so I haven't seen this specifically with river otter, but when I was working in California on Fisher, we would find den trees of females that would just have given birth to the kids. And then these male Fisher that we've had collared like long distances away from the den site, you would then find them in very close proximity to the female in the den tree where she'd just given birth. So it was interesting to kind of see that dynamic play out as far as a reproductive strategy as well. And as far as the number of young born, generally it's going to be around 2.7 average. You obviously can't have 2.7, so somewhere between 2 and 3 young born per litter. So next several slides that I'll talk about are just more of river otter sign. So I'm talking about that now because you may find it interesting. I realize a lot of people probably have experience with this based on response to the question that I asked earlier. But we have a monitoring program within the department that relies on identifying signs. So I just pulled some of the slides from that to share with you all. Just to show you different examples of river otter. So the top left would be a slide in the winter. You can see that also in the mud or in the summer. You see the tracks and then they're sliding on their belly for a form of locomotion. You have tracks, and I'll go a little bit more on tracks in the next slide. You can't see it really well, it's not showing up a latrine. This is also referred to as a toilet. That's an area where the animal's going to the bathroom on a regular basis, and it's concentrated in a certain spot. So if you're paddling or walking along a riverbank and you see that concentration and you see like scales within the scat, good indication that's a river otter. Then there's an example of scat there, but don't worry, I have more pictures of scat because I do all that. Good.
Mink also do the latrine?
Yep, so mink will do the latrine, and I'll show you a comparison of mink scat versus, the best I can versus otter. Raccoons will also do latrine sites too. Generally, for raccoon, I've seen those are further away from like a river or stream channel, you know, maybe like on a down log or a stump. But there's other animals that will have latrines as well. It's a good question. Yeah.
Do they carry giardia?
It's a good question. When I think of giardia, I think of beaver and beaver. So I can't answer that specifically because I know other mammals besides beaver, I think can carry giardia. And so I don't know if anyone else knows here, but I can't answer that specifically to river otter. Great questions. Any other questions? Yeah.
So like their den, they keep a den for a season or a year or, and then what's their day-to-day range like?
Yeah, so I don't really have a lot of slides in here just talking about their like home range, but otter will primarily use dens similar to other species during the time that they're raising their young or the time before they're raising their young. So if you remember back to that slide that I showed you with the patrician when they're being born, generally around that period is when they're going to be denning. And if it's a female, activity will concentrate in around the den area, so their home range might be smaller at that time of the year. But if you look at males during the breeding season, their home range is going to be larger because they're searching for females, and so their home range might be larger. And the other thing with river otter is that they're using streams and wetlands and lakes. So their home range is going to vary depending on what resources are available. So if there's a lot of resources available in a small area, their home range isn't going to be as large. But it could be, instead of like a circle or a square, or, like an area like that, it could be more linear. So they could be running 10, 12 miles upstream, downstream, because they're focused in on that, that stream corridor. So it's just going to vary. But I would say home range size could be somewhere between 3 and 30 square miles, depending on what resources are available. And it may not be, the overall size or shape of that home range is going to be different depending on whether it's a wetland or a lake that they're spending time on. Like we have river otter that are in along Lake Michigan, so that's going to be different than if they're running the Wisconsin River, things like that. Yeah.
Are they territorial then? Or do they cross back and forth because they're moving around so much?
Yeah, so they are territorial. I'll talk a little bit more about scent marking. Generally what we see with river otter and bobcat, some of these other fur bearers that we have, is that you'll have female home ranges are smaller. And so then they'll stack up like this, and then a male home range will overlap several female home ranges. And then you may have some male home range overlap, but generally you're gonna also have some of these like latrine sites or scent marking or other things to communicate with one another that, this is my territory, and there's communication that's physical communication, but also the nonverbal, through the scent marking and things like that. All real good questions. I appreciate the questions. Don't have the feet with me, but just wanted to focus on this if you're in and along a river, right? So the top track that I'm showing you is the hind foot. If you look at the hind foot, it's a little bit more asymmetrical, I would say, than the front foot, which is on the bottom. If you look at the interdigital pad of both, I would describe that as like a C shape. They have 5 toes. And then in between those toes are the webbing. And the interesting thing when I look at a track of a river otter is you try to figure out, is this a left foot or is this a right foot, right? So this actually is the left hind foot and then the left front foot because the digits are further back on the inside, right? So with this digit coming back, that's left-handed or left foot of a river otter. So if you were to see the opposite with that inner toe being further back, that'd be the right side. So I don't know if that's interesting or not, but something that if you're walking down the creek with a buddy or friend or whatever, be like, hey, what foot is this? Is this the left foot or the right foot? So it's something to talk about as you're stomping around out there. And then the front foot, I don't know if I mentioned this, about 3 inches, 3 to 4 inches, depending, and then the front foot's gonna be smaller, anywhere from 2 to 3 inches. Again, that's gonna be variable depending on a juvenile animal or a male animal. We talked about sexual dimorphism, so the feet are gonna be different as well. Just a different look at it, right? So you can see the interdigital pad, you can see the toes, and then you can see the webbing in between. And then the hind foot with a little bit larger interdigital pad. We talked about a couple of the other critters that have maybe similar looking tracks. Talked about mink being smaller, so 5 toes, anywhere from 1 inch to 1.75 inches. Raccoon will run river corridors, stream corridors, right, 5 toes, but the digits are much longer. And then when you get to fisher, you just don't see the webbing in between those digits. But fisher are spending a lot of time running through riparian areas, river corridors, stream corridors, things like that. So if you're in those areas and you see these tracks, you can try to distinguish fisher, raccoon, and mink from river otter as well. You heard of a crossover site? So this is just an example to show you, talk about the day in and day out of a river otter, right? They're spending time cruising through a river. And if they don't want to go around this bend, right, and swim that extra distance, they're like, well, I'll get out and then I'll swim across because I know that's a shorter distance. And I'll jump back in the river over there and go about my merry way. And so when they get up out of the river and cross over land, we simply refer to that as a crossover site. So you might see where a river otter comes in and out of the river, crosses over dry land, and then pops back in. Through this slide in here, because this is again something that we share with our staff. We have a River Otter Bridge Stream Survey, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But like, what are good tracking conditions, or what would I say would be good tracking conditions in the wintertime? And so last winter, I don't know if we had much or any snow at all. I just feel like when you have snow on the ground, tracking river otter, documenting signs a lot easier than if you don't have that, right? If you have mud, you can do that, but having snow is key. Generally a day to 3 days after a good snow would be a time to get out there. It gives the otter time to move and lay down tracks, but not so much time that it kind of becomes obscure, or the tracks are messed up or things like that. Other thing is if you have drifting snow, high winds, that pretty much acts like snowfall again. So if you have a period like that, you want to wait at least 24 hours, give those animals a chance to move if you want to find tracks. And the other thing, I'll show you pictures of this, but generally with river otter, if there's a little bit of ice on the river, it's going to be easier to see their sign because they're either be traveling on the ice and snow within the river channel or on the bank. And if you don't have that ice on the river or stream, then they might just be swimming through that and you wouldn't see sign laid down. So just an example of decent river otter tracking conditions. So we talked about the tracks, talked about conditions. You're also going to see the different gaits or gait patterns. So here you see more of like a slower walk. And with that, you'll also have the tail drag. Here you have more of a loping, so the animal's jumping maybe a little bit of a tail drag. And then when they pick up more speed, you have this 1x2x1 pattern, right? And then the distance between the tracks is gonna be a little bit larger because they're moving faster and cover more ground as they are moving. And so that's just a couple different examples too. If you see these different track patterns, a good example of river otter. And here's another slide. Here's another look at that from above. I always thank Michelle Woodford. She's a wildlife supervisor that we have that works out of northern Wisconsin, but she's also a fantastic photographer. So she has a lot of wonderful photos of river otter and river otter sign, and she shared that with me to put in several presentations, and this happens to be one of them. But here it's hard to make out, but you can see the dot dot dash pattern, and then here you have an opening in the ice where the river otter jumps in there and then pops back out and then continues on. So you can document this as river otter sign, but you don't really know maybe how many river otters are in this area, right? Is it one that's just been in and out and messing around, or is it multiple river otter? That's gonna be a lot harder to determine from above, but this is pretty easy to tell that it's river otter sign. Here's another example, right? So you see 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, slide, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, slide, right? So if you see this on the snow, really good chance that you pinpoint like, yeah, it's river otter, right? Pretty easy to tell if you see it like this. Talked about the different physical characteristics of a couple of those critters, talked about the tracks, and I promise you more poo photos, so here's some of those.
Thank you.
I'll keep them coming. So you have Fisher in the upper left-hand corner. I should qualify this. Anytime that you have scat, to confirm what species it is, generally, I think the genetic test should be done, right? And so I don't want to be like, 100% that these are the critter that I'm talking about, but there are characteristics of the scat where you can say, I'm pretty confident that this is what species it is. Not always, but you can get pretty close. So for Fisher, they generally have like a tubular, like a single solid scat, and then it's tapered on the end. And so I worked in California, I mentioned that before, but we had scat detection dogs there, and a lot of the scats that the dogs hit on as being Fisher were like this, and they went to the lab, were tested, and they came back. I've seen a lot of these and feel pretty confident about that. River otter I already showed you with, kind of can be tubular, but it can also be non-uniform. But you see the scats or parts of the crayfish in there. Mink's gonna be a little bit smaller, a little bit more rope-like. Again, could be in a latrine site. And then raccoon, it's gonna be larger. There's a nickel there, a dime there to kind of compare it. Tubular, sometimes it can be more segmented, so you can see 3 or 4 segments of the scat.
Is that blue color typical of the raccoon?
No, I think that's just my poor slides. Yeah. Because I can't, the technology here is fantastic, so I don't think it's anything to do with the projector. I think it's just the quality of the photo that I have. If you find a blue one, I don't. Something's going on. And here's more. We're after dinner by quite a bit, so I don't feel as bad. But the other thing that you might see with a river otter scat is like a jelly substance. And so talked about the glands that the mustelids have. There's also parts of the intestine that can shut off, and they kind of create this jelly. So you see the scat and the jelly there, and if you see that, that's a pretty telltale sign too that it's a river otter scat. And here is just another example of a latrine site. You have the ice area where the river otters popped out here. I wish the slide was showing up a little bit better. But then, they might come through here, through this little tunnel and pop out. But they're definitely marking here. And so this is very active river otter sign and active marking. So you can tell that animal's coming through here on a pretty regular basis. And then there's just an example without the jelly on it. Talked about the burrows already. here's just an example of what a river otter den would look like. Another thing that I get as a state employee, as a fur bear biologist, are lots of pictures of not only scat and what is it, but I have a den, what's living here, right? And so looking at this and just seeing it in a photo would be really hard to tell what species it is. You know, you'd have to take measurements of the overall den opening. But the big thing with this is you're looking for other supporting characteristics or evidence. So going into the den, here we have snow, but if there was mud or sand, you're gonna look for those tracks that I was talking about, right? And having all those things and piecing that together, that's how you can confirm what kind of den site it is. Just looking at a hole in the ground in a photo is tough. Being boots on the ground is the easiest. And so if you can combine those, if someone's not quite sure, but they can send you photos and things like that, then you can confirm a den or a den site for a river otter. Another thing you might see is a fish kill. Walking along a frozen river or lake, river otter will pop out and eat fish there, and they may leave a portion of it out on the ice. So that's another indicator that you have river otter sign. So talked about otter themselves, talked about some of the characteristics and sign. Next couple slides we're going to talk about are just monitoring programs that the department has had. And then I'll finish up with some of our river otter management within the state. Any questions right now? Yeah.
I'm a little curious about mortality of river otter. Is there a certain stage in your life where you preyed upon by other?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Of you guys heard in the back, but the question was, is there a certain stage of their life where they're preyed upon more? So I'd say definitely younger river otter are more susceptible to mortality. The other thing is in the water, there's not a lot of other critters that are going to, catch a river otter and kill it. But if they're in an area where they're going over the dry land, like one of those crossover sites, wolves or coyotes, even bobcat could get otter, smaller otter, and be a source of mortality for river otter. But they're a mustelid, and I always talk about mustelids being like pound for pound, one of the more like tenacious or ferocious animal. They got a lot of personality, and I don't think I'd want to tangle with a river otter personally. I think there's other things out there that I'd rather,
How fast are they?
how fast, on the water or on the ground?
Both.
I couldn't tell you miles per hour, but they're faster than you would think, I would say. So I don't even know if I don't want to venture a guess, but they're fairly quick. Any other quick questions? All right. So the survey that we had done historically, some of you may have known Bruce Kahn, but he was a fur bear researcher for the Wisconsin DNR Otter Rhinelander through the 90s and 2000s. And so he developed aerial survey for river otter, fixed wing survey, where it'd fly transects and then look from above for that river otter sign that we had. So we ran the survey, I think for the better part of 2 decades, all the way up till 2018. And so that was a large part of our river otter monitoring over that period of time. And it involved the pilot, an observer in there, and they make these flights. And depending on the conditions of the sun and the shadows and things, it could be really easy or it could be difficult. But there was definitely costs involved, some risk to staff with getting up in an aircraft and doing surveys on a regular basis. So we decided in 2018 to go away from that. But this is one survey that we did for a number of years. I think I just threw this one in here as well. I showed you the photo that was zoomed out a little bit on the river where you saw the opening in the ice. But sometimes people ask, well, how does a river otter get out from underneath the ice if it's traveling through there? And so they'll find areas where the ice is thinner, and they'll keep that open through their activity in and out. And so if you see an area like this where, I don't know if you can see the tracks coming in, right, through here, they'll jump into the water. They might swim up and find another area like this where there's an opening, or they might go down, search, look for something to eat, and then pop right back out of that. One question that you guys haven't asked me yet, but I know it's probably coming, is how long can river otter hold their breath? Who knows? Got a guess, anyone?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? Pretty close, and I don't know for sure, right? So if you have a pretty healthy river otter, has been running a lot already, you know, it might be able to hold it for 5 minutes, but generally we say like up to 4 minutes. They can slow down their like respirations and things, so they don't have to come back up. So wonderful guess, about 5 minutes. Yeah. So this is the new survey design that we have. So we went away from the aerial survey, and now we have a river otter bridge stream survey. And the pilot for this, or the research that kind of got it started before we adopted it, actually was here at UW-Stevens Point. Sean Crimmins was a professor here for a while, and he had a grad student, Christy Kuhn, I think. I think her last name's escaping me, but they tested boots on the ground, searching for the river otter sign that I just got done talking about, and then also using trail cameras to try to document the presence or absence or occupancy of river otter. And this is the design that they came up with. I think the cameras were fairly promising, but there was issues with changes in water level, ice hitting the camera setup, and then also the heat signature of river otter coming out of a cold creek or water source is not always captured depending on the type of camera that you're using. So that could cause issues as far as documenting their presence. So we went to this ground survey where we have a bridge site that's been identified, different characteristics of the stream or river channel, and then the individual walk up 200 meters on one side, back down, 200 meters, back up, cross over, and do the same thing on both sides of the river. So total survey area of 800 meters, looking for river otter sign there. Have different survey sessions. So you can see they start basically in December, run through beginning of March. And so we want our staff to hit at least 4 of these survey periods. You know, there may not be great snow conditions, or schedule may not allow because they're doing something else. But if they can hit 4 of these sessions and document any river otter sign that they have or lack of sign, then what we're trying to get at is just the occupancy of river otter across Wisconsin, in both northern Wisconsin and the southern part, and have a long-term data set as far as that presence or occupancy, and to see if those trends are going upward, if they're stable, or going down. So we started this survey, I think, in 2021, and we've run it. This will be the 4th year now. So we're starting actually to have the ability to look at, you know, what's happening, right? Because hard to look at a trend after 2 years, 3 years. You finally can maybe look at something, and as the years go by, I have a little bit more to work with. Yeah, it's not showing up real well, just showing you some different signs that our staff has documented. You know, you have rock here, but you see the river otter shot up through this part of the bank. Here, you don't see this a whole lot. I don't know if the animal fell through or did this on purpose, but it's almost like burrowing through the snow. You know, think of marten being subnivean and doing things under the snow, but otter are playful, so maybe they're just like screwing around, messing around, or maybe there's some other reason, but I thought that was an interesting photo to include in here and show you. You know, kind of up on a bank, you'll find the sign up here. I think I just put this as an example of, you know, pretty wide open space, nowhere to really you know, dive for cover. They're just out in the wide open, right? But you still see that that's the dot dash for river. So those are some of the monitoring and surveys that we do. Any other questions right now? Yeah.
Have you tried using drones for surveys?
Not for river otter, but the drones are becoming like more of a option, I think, for us. And so we've talked about doing that for like beaver surveys or, muskrat huts. And I think you could do that too now, have drone pilots just fly the bank, that could save, staff safety, so they're not messing around next to river when it's 0 degrees out like today. And things like that. So we really haven't adopted it, but it's something that we've talked about. And I think it show a lot of promise of us being able to use something like that in the future.
It's the typical lifespan of an otter.
So we'll talk about our sampling, but we collect teeth from river otter that are harvested and we can get age data on that. And so we have some that have been up to like 13 or 14 years old. So we have some river otter that are fairly old, some that are younger, but yeah, it kind of depends. But I'd say max range in the wild, I would say somewhere around 15 years, but there could be some that are older. Just what we've seen is around 15 years for old aged otter.
Did you say that fishers do subnivean activity?
American martin, the pine martins. Yep.
So they're hunting the shrews or
Exactly.
bulls or whatever underneath the snow?
Absolutely, yep. So they'll spend a lot of time and with the lack of snow cover, we feel like that can negatively impact martin, right? Because we're on the lower end of their range in Wisconsin. And so if we have warmer and warmer winters and less snow cover, I think that could be negatively impacting martin and martin survival.
Wouldn't expect an otter to be looking for fish underneath the snow.
That's why I wanted to show that, just because it seemed unique to me, and I don't know if anyone else has seen that at all, ever, but that's the first I've seen that documented. All right, jumping into river otter management. So this story is real similar to other species, whether it's deer, turkey, beaver. But they were common, found throughout the state till like the 1800s. Then you have habitat change, unregulated take, numbers drop down where we don't have many river otter at all. They're almost extirpated. But we were fortunate in Wisconsin that we didn't have total extirpation, and so we'd have never had a river otter reintroduction in Wisconsin. A lot of other states in and around the Midwest have, but we have not. You can see the protections listed here, seasons, I say seasons, but basically harvest, no harvest, or trapping, no trapping, start in the late 1800s. So you have protections there. Basically not many seasons throughout the 1910s and early 20s, mid 20s. Then you have an open season in 27, and since 1954, we've had a river otter season in Wisconsin at some point or another since then. And so river otter are still doing really well throughout the state. But that leads me to,
What was happening with that goose in that picture?
So I think that photo is just random one that I grabbed, but they can be aggressive in urban areas. So I think that gentleman was just walking through, a parking lot, and the goose got up and started slapping him around. And if you've ever done a goose roundup or tried to hold a goose, like they're pretty powerful birds, so. Yeah. Just a random photo of a goose there, sorry. Switch things up on you, feathers versus fur. So mentioned the river otter reintroductions. So there's been over 20 states that have reintroduced river otters. So if you look at like between those 1900 and 1980, a lot of these states in green lost river otter. They didn't have any for a long period of time. But Missouri, Dave Hamilton was a fur bearer biologist down there and really spearheaded the river otter reintroduction efforts in the country. And so they reintroduced river otter from Louisiana. The river otter there were trapped with this number 11 long spring. They were restrained, received vet care if they needed it, and then they were put in cages and fed fish. And then at that point in time, they were put on trucks and then transported to release sites. And so a lot of states would do a feasibility study, you know, what habitat do they think is acceptable for river otter? Try to key in on those locations and then bring those river otter in from Louisiana and let them go and hope for the best. And that recipe worked really well in Missouri, and so a lot of other states adopted that. And so everything in green kind of took that same strategy and reintroduced river otter to where it's one of the most successful fur bearer or any kind of reintroduction effort that's occurred for a species. Mentioned I worked in Indiana for a while. Indiana did this as well. This gentleman here is named Scott Johnson. He's since retired, but in the 1990s, he led the effort for Indiana's river otter reintroduction. And so this is Scott and others at the Muscatatuck National Wildlife Refuge. So if you've ever been to Indiana, it's a refuge in central Indiana, and they released a lot of river otter there and had a lot of success. So you can see over 5 years, released over 300 otter from Louisiana, 12 different sites and watersheds. Again, that was determined through a feasibility study. And in Indiana, you've been through there from the north to the south. In the central part of Indiana, a lot of agriculture, not a lot of great stream or river corridors, or some, but the primary emphasis there was great habitat in the north and the south. Other thing that I just want to mention quickly about river otter management is a program called CITES. People familiar with CITES at all? Right? Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. And for river otter, they're on Appendix 2, which means they're lookalike species for other endangered river otter that may be in like South America or other places. So because there are other endangered river otter otter species, if we're harvesting otter here in Wisconsin or in the United States, we have to ensure that all those are legally harvested before they enter like any kind of fur trade or pelts or exchange or anything like that. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a tagging program, and we are part of that. And so when a river otter is harvested here, it has to have its pelt sealed with a tag, and that's basically an affidavit by the department and the trapper that that river otter was harvested legally, and then it can be used for other purposes. If it doesn't have that, then it cannot be used like in international markets. You can transfer it across international borders or anything like that. It's just a way to maintain records and monitor the population to ensure, you know, there's no, like with river otter, I showed you a map, they're everywhere across the state, all the way across the country. We're not really worried about them, but we are worried about the other threatened and endangered species. So we want to comply with that. Have different zones. These are the two zones that we have now, north zone and south zone. This is Highway 64. River otter zone in northern Wisconsin runs a little bit longer. Think about conditions out there right now. It's difficult to like trap or get out there and harvest animals. And so this would go a little bit longer after like ice breaks up a little bit in the spring before you know, the pups are born. Used to have a quota system. Well, we still have a quota system, but used to have permits where there was a limited number of permits available. You'd have to apply for a tag, and then you were either successful or you weren't successful. Mandatory reporting within 24 hours, and then you had to meet with a conservation officer, warden, by 7 days after the month of harvest to get that CITES tag and have that pelt sealed again for the CITES program. We switched now to where we still have a quota, overall quota that we don't want to exceed. A seasonal bag limit of 2, no longer have an application. If you buy a license, you receive a harvest authorization. We're able to monitor that through our Go Wild licensing program. And if someone harvests it, they have to register it within a program called Game Reg. And so that way we're able to track basically in real time how many river otter are harvested throughout the season. So we're able to keep very close tabs on what the harvest is doing. And this just gives you an idea of historical harvest from the late 1970s up and through last year. So I included this here just to give you an example of what harvest can do if you have differing conditions. So last year we had a couple different things going on. Does everyone remember what the winter was like last year? Wasn't one, right? Yeah. So I think in February is 65 degrees, had tornadoes coming through in the southern part of the state. So really mild. And so with that, I think there was several things going on where access was easier because there wasn't snow and ice conditions. So that made it more favorable. You also maybe had people that would want to be snowmobiling or ice fishing and things like that. They weren't doing those things because they couldn't, so they were more focused on maybe trapping river otter. And then also the other thing is beaver prices. So the show Yellowstone, a lot of cowboy hats on that show that had a little shift in interest in cowboy hats, and cowboy hats are made out of beaver felt. And so beaver prices jumped up a little bit last year with beaver and river otter using similar habitats. There was more interest in harvesting beaver, and so we also had a few more river otter harvested that way as well. Harvest so far this year has dropped back down. It's more in line with what we saw like in 2017 and 2018. So those things can change, and that's one reason why we monitor the harvest very closely.
What is the harvested pelt used for?
Yep, so it can be used for different things. So it can be used for personal use. Like some people like to have that and make different products, whether it's like a hat or gloves and things like that. It can also go to different like furriers to make other fur products. There's lots of different things that you could use that pelt for. And like with the fur bearers, some can be used for meat consumption. I know some people cringe at that, but we have, people that harvest beaver, bobcat, muskrat, raccoons, where they'll harvest that animal and still use the meat as well. So there's a lot of different uses for the parts and pieces of different fur bearers that are harvested. The other thing that we've done over the years are parts collection. So not only do we count how many are harvested, how many are registered, but we also ask for parts and pieces so we can keep track of what's going on the best we can with the population. So I talked about the tooth and like, how do I know there's a 15-year-old river otter out there? Well, we collect the tooth and we send that out to a lab called Matson's lab. That's in Montana. And they do a thing called cementum annuli. So they're able to do a cross section of the tooth and then count the rings, growth rings, basically just like a tree. And so we get the age. And so then we know age at harvest for the animals. And we can also look at male versus female. So you get a sex ratio, a number of males harvested versus females. And then also what we did for a while, we're not currently doing this, but we could collect the reproductive tracts, and if there was, an active pregnancy in the ovaries, you could find these little reproductive bodies called corpora. You can count those and figure out like how many potential young that, the litter size of what that female had last time there was pregnancy. And now we've gone to a subsampling approach, so we collect about 400 jaws a year that we submit for aging. So with that, I think that's all that I had for you all. It's a summary slide. Our goal is we want to monitor river otter trends, look for different alternatives. So we have harvest data, but we also want to have survey data that's independent of harvest, and so that's why we have those river otter bridge stream surveys. So we're looking at that index, whether that's going up or down. The other thing that I just wanted to mention with that river otter bridge stream survey, that's been focused on just our wildlife staff helping out with that. But at some point, we may be thinking about the possibility of opening that up to like a citizen science component, where we could sit down, have something like this, a little bit more involved training, and then citizens, people with interests would have a bridge site that they could go out and monitor and report back, similar to wolf tracking or carnivore tracking that the department has, where we rely on citizen trackers, things like that, so.
Okay, so I've had two, the last half dozen years, I've had two dead otters hit by cars in front of my house. Should I be reporting that or? I mean, it's in summer, they get a little raunchy, but you see it when you smell them, you know?
Yeah.
But, should they be reported to somebody or?
You don't have to. So one thing that we do, if they come in and they report to us, we document that. So in a situation where it's a roadkill river otter, we would do that and try to salvage it if we could, because we have different programs where we try to educate people through a trapper ed program, about handling pelts and things like that. And so if we have an animal that's already dead, then we put those through that program as well. But the other thing is we're not gonna get every roadkill report. And so if it's raunchy and it's been there for a while, don't feel like you have to report that to us. But the other thing that may be of interest to this group or somebody that if you do come across one that isn't raunchy, you can reach out to your local warden, and they can work with you to report that. But also if you have interest, you can get a salvage tag and they can sell that to you at the fair market value if you want to try to utilize that rather than have it rot. It's just another option where that pelt then can be used as long as, you weren't the one that killed it, or harvested it, because we don't want people to intentionally go out there and run over animals or anything like that, right? Just to get one. But if you come across one, it can be salvaged, then that's just an option for it.
What do they pay for it?
So right now, a river otter pelt would average probably somewhere between $20 and $25. But if you look at 10 years ago, there was a higher demand and some pelts are going for $150 to $200. So fur markets are down now, they've been down for a while, but they will cycle. And so fur values can go up and down. And I think that's, another good reason why we have monitoring programs for some of these species. So we can, if those markets are changing, we can see what impact that's having on harvest and we can change our management approaches, adjust quotas, things like that.
Do the otters favor a particular species of fish and what sizes?
Yes, so that's a good question. I don't know if they favor, I think the ones they favor are the ones they can catch. Cause I've heard other things where, they only target like rough fish, right? Like carp or suckers or whatever. But I've seen plenty that have had bass or trout or, other things too. So I don't know, there's probably a study that I'm not aware of that maybe looks at that more closely, but I don't think they're too selective. I think it's just what they're able to get a hold of, and then, that's gonna be the one that they grab and eat. Yeah.
Would you say it's accurate to say that they play?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. I think
Because
that's,
we watch them sometimes and it just seems like it has to be that.
yeah, I think river otter, especially compared to like some other species that we have here, there's no other way to describe it besides, play or playful interaction, right? And it could be a mom with 3 young, messed around, but you also seeing groups of 8 to 12 river otter, just goof around, going up and down, sliding.
Yeah.
Mess around, tumbling around. So, yeah, that's how I would describe it.
How long do the young stay with the mother?
So we'll stay with mom usually till the fall, but it could be like the following spring. It's gonna depend again on resources and what's available. Mom might kick them out a little bit earlier. They might want to venture out on their own, but usually by that first fall or early in the next year, at some point they'll take off, but not always.
When they're not in a den, you said they den like in winter or whatever, but when they're not in a den, where do they sleep?
Yeah, so they'll curl up in different spots. Say that it's not a den site, but it may look like a den, but they may not be going back to the same spot every night, right? So talked about their home range being fairly large. They'll curl up anywhere, like root wads, areas that provide cover up out of the stream. There's a whole plethora of places where they could, end up laying down to rest or loaf around, so.
Usually pretty close to the river or water. Right?
Yeah, I would say most of the time probably close to it, but I would say, always say, never say never, and never say always, right? So. Yeah.
Population, is it, would you consider it stable? Are they going down, going up?
So the population is definitely stable. And we have river otter throughout the state. And I would say the distribution within the state is probably still increasing. So there's areas of the southeastern part of the state and around like Racine or Milwaukee where we probably had less reports of river otter, and now we're getting regular reports of river otter there. So I don't have the graphic, but we do collect like what county harvest comes from. And so I would show you that map, and every county would be lit up, right? So they're doing very well there. We're also finding them in a lot of like agricultural areas, which if you think back 20, 30 years ago, really didn't associate river otter with like agricultural ditches or channeling and things like that. But they're able to get in there and use those areas, and you'll see them go through farmland, agricultural areas. So they've adapted well, just like a lot of other species, which is really cool to see. So they're pretty much doing really well where they find something to eat, access to water, and can make ends meet. Yeah.
A similar question, they look like they're killing about 1,000, maybe 3,000 a year, somewhere in that range. What kind of percentage of the overall population is that?
Yeah, so we don't have an overall population count on river otter. We monitor harvest those trends by like what we were talking about before, like decreasing, maintaining, increasing. For a while, we did have a population model. This was years ago that we went away from it. And at that point in time, we were estimating somewhere between like 12 to 18,000 river otter. So I can't tell you what the population is now, but it's very hard to get an exact count of an animal, especially that's secretive. So we're finding out, rather than giving people like a hard number, if we're able to really focus in on these indexes of what the population is doing, is it increasing, maintaining, or decreasing? That gives us sometimes a better idea of what's going on with the population rather than like a number, right? Because if I tell you 12,000 to everyone in this room, that could mean something different to everybody. And, it's not an exact count because it's very difficult to census a wild animal population.
Check in and.
Yeah, you can't even do that with people, right?
There's a question online asking if you've ever seen a river otter use like their hands as a tool of cracking open food or anything like that.
Yeah, so I think.
Or rocks,
Yeah, so I haven't seen that like I have for sea otters, that will lay on and take rocks and bust open.
I think that's where they're alluding to.
Yeah, but they will chew mussels and turtle shells and things like that. But a lot of times, I think I sent the skull around, like they have a lot of muscle in their on their head, and so they're able to chew through a lot of things, and that's a tool that they use to crack open whether it's different mussel shells or turtle shell, snapping turtle shell or whatever. And maybe they do, I have never seen it.
Any other questions for tonight? Okay, well, thank you very much, Sean. We great. Right, well, we have a group going to the Platte River, March 19th, so that should be fun. There's about, I think, 15 people signed up for that trip. That was a free sign up, so that should be a really good time if you've never been to the Platte